Welcome to the Voices of Healing series with me, Annie.
Today we are joined by Jennifer. She is a family carer peer worker supporting family members, friends and other supporters on an adult inpatient mental health unit. She helps people navigate what's happening with a loved one, offers practical support and creates a more human, less clinical space during what can be a really stressful time.
I'm honoured to be recording from Jara country and wish to acknowledge and pay our respects to the Jar Jar Wurrung people, the traditional custodians and caretakers of this land. We thank them for their care of country and honour their elders.
Hello, good morning, Jennifer. Or Jen, how are you?
Well, thank you, Annie. Good morning.
And I'm cheating this morning. I've got a coffee. I don't have a tea.
That's all right. I've already had 2 coffees. So now I have some water.
So for those that don't know, me and Jen used to work together. But for those that don't know you, can you share a bit about your profession and your journey and really what's led you to work in the mental health system?
Yes. Well, I've been at the Alfred now for 6 years in my current role as a family carer peer worker, or sometimes people probably more commonly referred to as a carer family peer worker. But I guess, thinking about language, a lot of people don't identify as a carer. A lot of people might not be related, so they might not recognize themselves as family, but they are support, they might be chosen family support people. So I, connect with, work on the adult inpatient unit, and I connect with family, friends and support people. Yeah. And how I've sort of come to be in this role is, I've supported people very close to me through their mental health journeys, relapse and hospital admissions. So I guess leaning on what that was like for me, my journey supporting a loved one through a hospital admission helps me be in the environment and then have that mutuality to connect with loved ones and help them navigate their journey and how they can best support somebody in that
How
moment.
have your experiences shaped your own understanding and approach within that role of yours?
I think very early on, when I reflect on, when I first started to where I am now, I think I was very quick to want to give the family something tangible, or you kind of go into, how can I, what can I say that's going to help? And then I think sometimes you'll be sitting in a quiet moment and you'll want to fill that silence. But I think I've sort of come to learn that we don't always have the answers or have a resource to give. I think I've largely learned you've just got to be in that, meet people where they're at, and they might not want to speak to you during that period. And quite, and unfortunately sometimes you'll meet them again because their journey with their loved one has brought them back to hospital, and you can have a completely different engagement because it's a different time in that loved one's episode of care and where they're at as well, in how they can sort of show up and support somebody, or I think more importantly what they're needing at that time, needing that space to talk, needing that bridge to engage other supports. Yeah. So I think I've learned just to be, more present, and you just feel your way through the conversations now. It's not as, not so much in fix-it mode. And I guess, there's a lot to say about meeting somebody where they're at, whether that be a family member or the family member meeting their loved one where they're at.
I think that allows for more like authentic conversation, doesn't it? Not having the need to like pull the answers and meeting them where they're at, which I think that authentic hearing can be, is what people might need is what people need in that space often.
Absolutely, Annie. Yeah. And I think, what resonates with me, you saying authentic, I think largely my role is, I get humanize the process because it is so clinical. There is a lot of information to process.
So much information.
Yeah. And, it's quite an acute time. So it's sometimes really hard to process all that information. The last thing I want to do is come with more information, I suppose. It's helping, family members process what's happening.
And I think with
with that mirroring as well with you, because you are sitting in that space of, where your own experience, you were a loved one or a family member. Sometimes I know in my experience with family members and loved ones, I've wanted to fix their problem and I can't. And sometimes it is exactly what you're doing in those spaces, is just sitting, being there, witnessing. I think that's a beautiful example to lead with, that in itself is helping. And that's sometimes only what the family member can do in that space. Is that making sense? Am I making sense there?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're not in the driving seat a lot of the time. We can see, we can see what we want to do for our loved one, or what we want, how we want to shift direction and best support them. But sometimes we've just got to sit and witness that. That can be quite hard too. Yeah.
You mentioned, sometimes you'll be working with someone and they may leave and then they may come back or return to the services. So you'll be working with their family again. And I suppose we often think about healing as it's not an end point. There's the phrase, healing is a journey.
Yeah.
For you personally, but also what you've witnessed in your work, what does the kind of word healing mean to you, negative or positive?
Yeah, I think healing, there's something it feels quite warm and nurturing, but I very much associate it with that ongoing recovery. I feel like it's ongoing. I feel like healing comes into it when you see these measurable goals that you've gone through, I guess milestones where you feel like you're more through it. And I guess, and then I think when you're looking at recovery or that ongoing journey, it's work really, whether that and what that looks like. It could be, psychiatry input, medication, and then just the basic things of exercise and diet and, and self-care, so much largely self-care. I just associate it all as ongoing because I feel like once feeling like we're on the other side of it, we stop paying attention and, and that's when things start to creep up on us. That could present in how a relapse occurs or how we just sort of flatline in that journey and then start to, feel like we're regressing, I guess, because we're not paying attention to ourselves and what we need. So I kind of associate the two, and I think they're both very positive. And some days it doesn't feel like it's healing, and some days it doesn't feel like that journey of recovery. You feel quite stunted, or it's not ongoing.
Which I think is really important, isn't it, to remember as a family member or a loved one? Because I know sometimes, you're like, oh, they're doing so well. And then suddenly you get news that they've relapsed or, that they're not doing so well. And it can feel, I know as a clinician, I have loads of space and empathy for that. But sometimes as a loved one, I can get quite frustrated and like, oh, we were just on the right track or we were doing so well. But I think that's really important, just to be like, it's going to be up and down, and that journey and ongoing and all those points that you've just said.
Yeah.
For someone who's witnessing a loved one face an acute mental health challenge for the first time, what real practical advice would you offer in that space?
I really go back to basics because I think we really go on that journey with them. So, can only can sometimes, we really gone, it can feel quite traumatic. So it's just going back to basics, really, being able to sort of factor yourself in as to what you need. How is your sleep, going for a walk, the things that sort of help slow you down so that you're able to process information and able to communicate yourself and more clearly. We need that time and space so that we can, best show up for our loved one and support them the best way we can. Because we're only human too, we can we can very easily burn out in that process, going along with them and trying to best support them and best support them so that they are accessing those services. I guess where I'm at, being on the inpatient unit, quite often that acuity, there's a lot, the risk is very present, which sort of then initiates that at hospital admission. So things are so heightened. And I guess something we're often challenged with, is how could we prevented it to get this heightened? And and to be here. And I guess my advice is always, it's this, we shouldn't a hospital admission on a loved one, but I guess it's the circuit breaker sometimes that everybody, they need it. They need those supports and interventions. We can only do so much to support them in that space. And then sometimes, and then we need more supports, more scaffolding. So I guess it's reframing, how we're here now. Yeah, but it is very hard because sometimes people sort of sit in that space. They've tried to access those services for their loved one, a lot sooner, and and they've been hit with barriers, straight from the mental health system, or I guess it's always sort of evaluating that risk, and not always having the insight. Their loved one's not always wanting that input, so it's sort of how do you, get them to that space, and that looks very differently for everyone. So it's very,
I can imagine with that frustration of the system and it not always, being able to easily access the things that they need, that would sometimes create a barrier or a defense in probably accessing your services. Like, I've got a list of things to do. I don't need, and work and life and everything else. Do I really need to then have a phone call or speak or reach out with a family carer? Peer worker, do you find that's the case sometimes? And what would you say to those people?
Yes, yeah. Well, respectfully, I guess I always respect that. If they had sort of been, expressed with the clinical team that they didn't require that phone call, I guess I could show up in other ways. There are other sort of supports, practical supports that I could and it could be as simple as discounted parking because they're coming 2 times a day to sort of alleviate those financial burdens, because there is sometimes, you're having to take time from work. So it might be that it's not so much the space to talk about what's really challenging for them, but, other small things that can help them in that moment. And from there, it might, open space for more communication. And I guess a big part of the role too, Annie, be just trying to open up that communication with the clinical team or, and myself. But yeah, quite often, not quite, I guess some people are very practical. They just want to, and I appreciate that. They just look at the practical tasks and, engaging with social work around their loved one's finances is that's enough for them in that time. Sometimes when they want to talk about, when you open up that space for talking about what's happening emotionally for them, that can feel very scary. And like, that's not going to be helpful in this time. They might also have support, other people that they have that safety and that they can openly speak with. I guess it's more, and then I guess my resources are more utilised in spaces where people are quite isolated. They don't have that community around them or that family or friends that they can feel comfortable sharing about their loved one. I think it's always what's happening for you and then what's happening for your loved one. You want to respect their privacy, but then you also sometimes need to unpack what's happening for you, and that involves sharing parts of their story because that's affected you in ways that needs to be recognised and supported. But yeah, when we're ready to, it looks very differently for us when we're ready to share. And not everybody's comfortable with speaking on the phone with somebody that they've never met before.
I think I was going to say, well, with mental health, there is so much stigma, isn't there? Even though we're trying to break it down and try and reframe that, and there's lots of conversations around that, but there's still, especially with, I think, some types of mental health illness that we might see, like addiction, or schizophrenia, like that deep psychosis, where people do start doing strange things. There is that more stigma. There may be depression or anxiety. And yeah, that can be really hard to talk about, which is making me really think about confidentiality and I suppose this concept of confidentiality in your conversation. And are there boundaries and limits that people should be aware of?
Yes, yeah. I feel like a lot of our conversations aren't documented in detail. It's a very generic note because, again, I'm speaking with them because their loved ones on the ward. It's not you, and ideal, it's me wanting to check in with them. It's not really, they're not it's not their file. However, I think when we speak about confidentiality, so a lot of it is very, in confidence, and I express that. However, I think if there was risk, if there's risk to a child or risk to someone's safety, I'm not going to shut down those conversations. I'm going to, try and hold that space as much as I can respectfully. But when there are, safety concerns, I encourage, that conversation with social work, or I may need to document that I need to share that with social work. And I'm always very transparent about that and opening that up. Yeah. So obviously everything, it generally is in confidence, but I think there are, there are circumstances where it is our responsibility to document when there are things really of concern around risk, risk to children or risk to somebody's safety. But in that instance, I would not be, it wouldn't be my role to document safety planning, or in those instances, in that instance, social work would be very much involved in that, in making sure that that person is safe and that they have access to all the resources necessary when family violence is part of that presentation. Yeah, but that
is the no, that is the worrying, scary thing, isn't it? When there is something happening at home and a partner is scared to talk about it because they feel like that may worsen the situation, or their loved one then may become more aggressive when they do return home or something like that. But I think it's just so important to remember safety, safety, safety.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you kind of highlighted it as well, but it's also, I think, managing that safety and that protecting that relationship as well. So, yeah, I think can feel quite nuanced in how we support that while still, addressing the risk and nurturing that relationship, because, sometimes family members share is that their loved one might not have wanted that shared. However, it did inform and support how we provided care for both of them, I suppose. So it's not always black and white, really. What's documented and what needs to be, what's discussed and what really needs to be documented.
Yeah. And I suppose, as loved ones, as clinicians, we know that we do things that can be maybe what we'd find embarrassing or shameful, or not how we would want to act, but certain events lead us to do things that we're not proud of. And having mental health professionals, we recognise that. So, we're not here to judge kind of that action, but more that support and, trying to find the avenues for that person to get better or have what they need in place. Yeah, it's always is going to be a tricky subject, but that's why the work you do is just so, so important. I was thinking, it kind of made me lead to another question, like obviously we have our loved one, or the person we're caring for, and then there's us. What about, because we spoke about community and how healing is kind of community, the people around that loved one, caring for their loved one, what would you advise their community, or how to show up for their loved one, if that makes sense? Because I know recently I've had someone going through a difficult time, and the people around them have wanted support, but just, finding it hard to have that conversation about how they can support them, or what do they need without, they don't want to step on their toes. They don't want to, they want to let that person have that space, but also do want to practically and emotionally want to support their friend who is in a difficult time with their partner.
I'm just going to reflect on, I remember with part of my lived experience is my brother, for example. And I can remember, when I think of our community being our extended family, and what really helped him was when people didn't treat him differently. They were just still, they treated him like not, they were, I guess he'd had many hospital admissions and lots of challenges, but they just talked to him how they normally would. And that always resonated with me. And I think for me, being, a support person, supporting a partner, or, having those spaces to just really open up at my own time, needed to. But I also feel like sometimes the obvious, I could think about the people closest to me, and the obvious thing that I could have implemented felt like the hardest thing. I think being consistent for somebody, and I guess we feel our way through this, like where they're at emotionally, and and how they're able to sort of add a support in their life. I think we can make these suggestions and know that, and we can see that that's really going to help them. But sometimes what's really going to help them isn't always the easiest thing that they can do in that time. And it's just continuing to show up and meet them where they're at, and creating that space, and still just reminding them of those resources and supports. For me, it was, psychology. And I remember, and it was my sisters, and I remember nothing irritated me more than when I was feeling so overwhelmed and frustrated about things. They'd say, it would be really helpful if you speak with a psychologist. And I remember thinking, I know why I'm so angry and mad and and upset. But obviously, and that, and I used my journey with psychology with, family all the time. When and it wasn't until years later that I saw the benefit of those sessions as well, because you don't come out of a session thinking, I feel great. Yeah, but I reflect on that, and I think even, what was very obvious for people around me at that time, what I needed, where I was at that point, I wasn't able to, I didn't have the emotional labor or the focus on myself to go there. But it's a journey, and I got there, and I can just, speak to how that has helped and shaped me to be where I'm at now, and be able to do my role, that be able to sit in this role. Yeah.
I love that example and that honesty. I think it's a bit like grief or anything. Like when we're grieving, we have to go through the process, and I can see a loved one and they're busy doing, they're not stopping, and I'm like, do you know what, if this is just going to get you through this time, then that's fine. If it's, you're not stopping and you're not pausing to like have emotion or cry, if this is what you need to do for the next few weeks, like let that be. And again, that consistency, I love that word that you said, just of the loved ones just consistently showing up, checking in. Because I think with mental health, it can be really draining, and it can be really difficult to be around. Like, let's be honest here, but just continually just being there and showing up is gently, not expecting anything. I think it can be just so helpful. Like, I'm just going to keep being here, however you're presenting in that time, which leads me to think about my experience that balancing the needs of a loved one with our own mental health can be really tricky. How do you think we can maintain our own well-being while providing that meaningful support? How did you maintain your well-being while providing support to your loved ones? Or maybe you didn't that well.
Yeah, when I think about, it's what you're doing, what it looks like now. Yeah, and it always is largely only going back to basics, like, diet, cooking for yourself. That's kind of like giving back to yourself. That's how I could feel. Sometimes it's, but then sometimes, the hardest to sit, you can be so fatigued and so in it that picking what you're going to have for dinner is like impossible, feels impossible. So maybe it's just, going for a walk, getting that fresh air, just sort of move. Yeah, for me, movement. And as you sort of slowly build that foundation back up again, or you then are able to sort of build on what that, whether that be psychology, your routine. Yeah, I think it's important carving out time for yourself, actually, that self-efficacy that we all can forget as carers, because we're so focused what we can do for others around us that we stop pouring into ourselves, stop investing.
It's almost like remembering who we are, aren't we? Because when we're so putting our energy into a loved one, we kind of lose ourselves, or our identity kind of shifts. You know, I know even as becoming a mother, like, you know, these first years, I feel like I completely have lost my Annie identity. And it's just like, oh, now I am the mum, like within the family, or I'm pouring so much of my love and energy. And that's what I wish to do for my children. And sometimes that self-care, all of those points that you've raised kind of go back to just remembering who I am, like whether it's taking that walk and being by myself, remembering myself on that walk, or my connection to what I love, which is nature, and, or, you know, just that book that I want to read, that, like, you know, of who I am and connection to myself. And yeah. And I think just, you know, even basic things like cooking, like the meals that I want to cook, instead of like my toddler's leftover bits on her plate, like, oh, what do I really want to eat? And I remember when I first had my daughter, and I think it's probably similar. It's like, if you can get 30 minutes to yourself a week of whatever you want to do, it can reduce the chances of you getting postpartum depression by like, it's like 80%, or it was a really high percentage. And I thought, 30 minutes a week, easy. Nah, so hard. And I think when you are so like with a loved one and you're working and you've got all these pressures, like just to find those 3 half an hour or that little time slot a week where you're not doing chores and you're not tired and you're not, you know, so fatigued that you're just on the sofa, can be really hard. And I suppose that's where the community can really help, by coming in and trying to give that person that time and space, whether it is like, I'm going to do the dishes so you can go for a walk, or let's have that half an hour just to talk about what you need and what you want. Yeah, that remembering of ourselves and who we are.
You've articulated that beautifully.
Thank you. What resources or local family support services can you recommend?
Or yeah, I mean, I do have quite a few like that I'll default to, but I think that's dependent on sort of like family dynamics and circumstances. But we, you know, one thing that came out of the Royal Commission, which hasn't shifted, was the mental health wellbeing centres, and the flagship stores in Dandenong, but they're in region, you know, out and around regional Victoria. If you do a Google, and I feel like the ethos is, you know, like a neighbourhood house sort of setting, where you could come in as a family member, but you could even bring your loved one in, that you're supporting the consumer. It's very inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very inclusive space, and you can just turn up and have a cup of coffee, or there are activities that are sort of planned and you can call them. And I think that's probably the most helpful resource at the moment, because it's not attachment dependent, and it's not appointment dependent.
Yeah. I think sometimes people think, I can't go to this space because I'm in this category, but, you know, just go and see if you can connect to your community or others. I know sometimes you might be pointed like maybe a counsellor or someone, and you might speak to them, and sometimes it's brilliant and it fits, and sometimes it doesn't always fit. But if something isn't fitting, don't let that be a barrier and stop you. Like, keep seeking. And sometimes the best way is just chatting to people who are in a similar situation and go, oh, what helped you? Or do you have a number for a good psychologist or counsellor? Or no.
Absolutely. It's a bit like dating, isn't it, Annie? Not everybody's that's the analogy I use. If it's not working, just chat. Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard you use that the other day. That's
yeah. I use the analogy like a hairdresser. Like, sometimes the hairdresser's right for you, and sometimes you go to a new hairdresser and you think this is not what I want, but you don't stick with them. You go and find someone else.
Yeah.
how can families assert their rights within the mental health system? So if they are, a loved one is in a centre and they're just really not happy, or they're in a facility and they're just not happy with something, what are their rights and how can they assert themselves in that situation? Because there is a power dynamic sometimes that it feels hard to be in.
Yeah. Yes. No, I can appreciate that. I think quite often that's when a family meeting's really appropriate, so that, everybody that's part of that, is playing a role in supporting their loved one's care and what that looks like in the hospital and when they're discharged. I think that's when a family meeting's appropriate. So everything's discussed and concerns are addressed. Yeah. And and it will help improve, the discharge planning. And everybody has, every family member has a right to ask for a family meeting. And yeah, that would be my.
I think that's a really great, simple point to start, because often I think also when there's a lot of unknowns because you don't know when someone might be discharged or getting better or what medication might work. And I think sometimes as loved ones, we can feel really lost and we don't really know what's going on. But having some kind of plan or some kind of pathway put in place can really help to have a bit of ground to stand on when it feels like the ground is in an earthquake. Yeah, so getting together with the team and putting face to names is always it always helps me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Being in the room together, in opposed to phone calls. And I guess that comes, and that's why open dialogue's a great thing as well, to have everybody in the room speaking openly. Yeah, but I guess we don't. I say open dialogue, and I wish it was always that straightforward. Yeah.
I suppose you can always ask someone to be in there to help with that open dialogue. Could you, if you, can you sit in those meetings, or who would be in those meetings normally in a family meeting?
Yeah, I'll always offer the family for me to attend if I, again, time constraints as well, time permitting. If it's appropriate, I'll always let the family have that option. But generally, it will, it'll be the doctor and the consultant and the registrar. Sometimes a social worker may be involved, or an occupational therapist, or the case manager if they're having ongoing support in the community. They would generally be, and then depending on who the family members are, and sometimes the loved one or referred to as a consumer might not want to be in that meeting, or it also might be appropriate that the loved one has a conversation with the clinician before their loved one joins.
Mhm.
To be just so that they can speak more openly, and we're being respectful of everybody before we all come into the room, so everybody's had their time.
I think in you beautifully answering that question brings me to a point of your usefulness in your position is you have your own experience, but also you know the system and you know how things work. So if people are in that setting for the first time, then they have a support person who can just tell them how things run in these spaces. Like even visiting hours, obviously you can ask nurses and the reception, kind of the basic things like when are meal times, when are visiting hours. But it's just so good to have someone who knows, there's the psychiatrist's job is this role. And you've said that your son really likes guitar. We actually have a music therapist, because you know the space. It's kind of like you can be that person to translate the facility to their loved one and how that looks.
Yeah, and break it down. Yeah, because sometimes it can feel like you're waiting really long time. Waiting forever. Yeah, waiting can feel like forever. Yeah, for the consumers and the family members, even just in the waiting room, waiting to go in to visit your loved one can feel like such a long process. You're right. And I guess, Annie, it can feel like sometimes it's just diversional therapy as well. You're not even really talking about the love, what's happening in that moment. It might be who's winning it in the World Cup, you know?
How can we, I suppose, collaborate to enhance our communication with the person that we're helping? I think this is a really difficult one and a really difficult question, because when we know someone, it can be really hard to, communicate effectively. I use the phrase, our family knows how to push our buttons the most because they put them there. So sometimes I always think as clinicians, we can, watch our language and we have that space to be in, have effective communication. But sometimes as a loved one, it can be really difficult. But communication is just so key to supporting our loved ones. Is there a way that we can collaborate to enhance our communication with the person we're helping?
It feels so, it feels like such a big question, actually, Annie. Communication styles and strategies, don't we? And we're all, and quite often in that space, I think, particularly in mental health, we're all kind of learning in how we're going to adapt to that individual and that family, and how we can best support the family to openly communicate. And I guess, the environment doesn't always lend to that as well. But I get, I think it's like just giving choice and opportunities, like having, art therapy as that resource for their loved ones to express themselves, or, and music therapy or sessions with psychologists. And I guess we're constantly building on how we can best show up and communicate for ourselves, and create that space for effective communication. But sometimes it can feel like a dog's breakfast too, when I sort of think about, situations where you reflect and you think, oh, how could have we improved on that? So I guess you're constantly evolving and looking at ways and what works. And I think that's why it's wonderful we have such a multidisciplinary team on the ward. And and I guess and then just creating that space and that to open up creating that space with loved ones. But then when we all come together, so that trying to open up that communication more so they can tell us what they need, and we could lean on the resources that we know that we have to support that.
When you, saying it is so individual and we all do have different communication styles, I suppose that's where it may be really helpful to ask for external support, especially around seeing those blind spots. Sometimes we don't know our own communication style or can't recognise sometimes, but, being both there, like if it was me and my partner having a couples psychologist or a couples counsellor to kind of watch our communication styles and go, you find it helpful when, or, if it is a family, peer support or a doctor or anyone, to be that kind of person and be like, okay, so let's break this down. What is helpful when we talk to each other? What isn't helpful? Or going to you and saying, my son finds this communication really helpful, or being outside, do you have any tips on how I could best talk to him or communicate or be with him? And it may be, well, if he likes being outside, maybe just going for a walk. You don't necessarily have to say anything, I think, again, asking for that help and asking, presenting your loved one, this is what they find useful. How can I be useful? But you're not alone. So reach out to your lovely family care peer worker, and you're doing a great job supporting a loved one. It can be really tough.
I appreciate that, Annie. Thank you. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Jen. All right, everyone, I will see you next time. Bye.
As we wrap up this episode of Voices of Healing, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our wonderful guests for sharing their invaluable insights and personal stories. Stay connected for more inspiring conversations, expert insights, and practical advice. If you want to be part of the series or want more information, get in touch either through our website or Instagram. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, be kind and take care of yourself and those around you.